data privacy in terms of policy here in the U.S. Basically, we've scratched the surface actually as to what policies are out there and how they're implemented, and some of the issues involved. And so, basically, I want to talk about again, this idea that genie out of the bottle problem, and policies that govern the private sector. What policies exist that deal with businesses and private communications, et cetera, and then talk about some policies that govern how the government interacts with privacy concerns, particularly an emphasis on the law enforcement and intelligence communities, since until COVID-19 came along, were the dominant discussion about what the government's doing in terms of accessing your data. So the genie out of the bottle, again, this is something that Professor Newman and Professor Rutoff talked about, but you can have theft of physical property, and with time it can usually be returned or replaced. Artwork, if it's stolen, sometimes you can't get it back, but there's usually an insurance policy, so you get something back. Theft of electronic information, particularly digital, what we're talking about here, digital data, is more difficult to correct, but in many situations there are legal frameworks and that can be leveraged to help mitigate. So if IP is stolen, for example, a copyright is infringed on, there are civic and in some cases criminal processes that can be used to at least compensate you for the loss. But where the exception is, of course, is in personal identifiable information, PII. Once it's out there, it's almost impossible to get it back. So the private sector, all right. So protection in the U.S., well, as you probably already know, there's no federal level General Data Privacy Act or policy or regulation or even guidelines, unlike the General Data Protection Regulation Act in the EU and in other countries. There just isn't. It's come up many times in Congress to pass laws on this, and we'll talk about in a minute why they don't get passed, but there isn't one. Some reasons for the lack: well, cost of business to implement is high. No surprise there, especially existing processes and business models, to go back and rework them to support a policy, a general data privacy protection policy, would be enormously expensive. And so those costs cause business to influence Congress's decision-making as to whether they should pass such a law or not. So the Fisa Act of '78, prior to that, rules were fuzzy as to what the intelligence community, again, our national, whether it's foreign or it's FBI, which is domestic, or DHS, which is domestic, what they could do with U.S. persons' data. And basically, law prevents collecting on U.S. persons if they have no foreign intelligence value. And that means, if it's all local, you can't collect and do anything with it. And if there is intelligence value, you can't just share it with anybody. There has to be a need to know. So that's sort of the high level acts, what the Fisa Act in 1978 is about. The details, you without a warrant, our intelligence community can collect on foreign intelligence for up to a year without getting a warrant. And that does mean collecting on U.S. persons, which I'll get to in the second bullet. Now, I want to say a few things. That satellite, that image of a satellite, as many of you may know, we have lots of satellites that orbit this Earth, and they collect all kinds of information. They're like vacuum cleaners. They just suck it up. And of course, they overfly the U.S. and they also overfly U.S. persons around the world. So that stuff's collected. But as long as the agency that collects that information takes every step to protect that information, they're allowed to do that. So there's caveats as to what you can and can't collect if you're in the intelligence community. Okay, if you do collect on a U.S. person, specifically you're targeting somebody, they have to have a link to a foreign entity, some kind of a foreign issue or challenge that you're going after. And then the Patriot Act came, and as I think everybody knows, there's a lot of the pendulum went from privacy to security drastically. And one of the big changes was Section 215, which allowed for bulk collection. It did a lot of things, but for one of them was bulk collection of metadata from the telecom companies. And when I say bulk collection, I mean everything. I mean, all the way back 20 years from now, okay? Whatever the telephone company or the internet provider had, all the metadata they had stored, you could grab. And not only that, but periodically the government could come back and collect all that. Keep getting updates to that. So again, the pendulum really moved over to the security side of the house and left the privacy side pretty exposed. Good news is it's starting to move in the other direction.